Welcome everybody to episode 2 of our FiveM Coding course here on the channel. So in today's episode, this is episode 2. If you haven't watched episode 1, we basically went over, FiveM Lua or just Lua in general, and we kind of went over what the basics of variables, functions, tables, lists, and so on were. If you haven't watched that video, make sure you go back and watch that first because we kind of went through, setting up your Visual Studio Code or your code editor and going through the basics. Today's episode is going to be a little bit, more advanced, which is going to be FiveM Natives and resource management. This is going to be a very important thing to break down because this is how you actually start making things happen. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So basically, we're going to first start with FiveM Natives. So basically what FiveM Natives are built-in game functions that call in your scripts to control GTA 5, right? The official Grand Theft Auto video game, essentially, right? So they're basically Rockstar's original engine exposed for FiveM, so you can do things like spawn cars, play animations, change player states. So for example, think no clip, god mode, invisibility, etc. Create blips, which blips are these things here. If you don't know what blips are, these are the things when you actually open your mini map or whatever, they show on the map, and then you can kind of click around on them. That's what blips are, and so on, right? So anything that actually controls your GTA 5 essentially is called a FiveM native, right? And there's all kinds of different kind of FiveM natives. So there's actually FiveM actually has a reference which is called documentation, and I'll leave a link for this in the description below, or you can just go to docs.fivem.net/natives. And if you just scroll through here, you are going to see countless and countless natives. Don't worry, you don't need to learn all these. You honestly are only going to be using a small amount. Honestly, you're not going to be using like 90% of these. So a good example of this is if you actually look up, let's see, visibility, something like that, you can actually do set entity visible, right? But if you go to server, you're going to see that this doesn't exist on the server side. That's because you can only set a entity's visibility, meaning, if it's invisible or how visible it is on the client. You can't do that from the server because that really wouldn't make sense. So moving on, which brings us on to our next point, which is going to be resource management, right? So there's three things you need to learn with resources when you're making them. There's three sides to it essentially, right? So FiveM resources are just folders that contain your scripts. Inside those scripts, each file runs in one of three places, right? Starting off at number one is server-side code. I think that this is the one a lot of people overlook a lot of the times, or may seem the most confusing. So server-side code basically runs on the server's machine, right? So think a VPS, think something in the cloud, not the actual player's computer, right? So if you have your friend Bob join your server, anything on the server side is going to run on the hosting computer, not Bob's computer. I hope that kind of makes sense. So a good example of this would be handling money, inventory, jobs, database queries, security checks to avoid cheating, and syncing logic to all players. The reason you do security checks on the server side is because server side cannot be tampered, right? For example, on the client, I could say my name is equal to Roberts. I could just override that and say my name's equal to Robert. On the server side, you can't override that, right? So that's why you always do security checks on the server side, not the client side, because you can never trust the client, right? So just remember that. I know that may have went, that's kind of more advanced thing, but we'll break it down to where it kind of makes sense here in a little bit. Next, you have client-side code, which runs on the player's PC. So, for this, you can think drawing UI, playing animations, detecting if a key is pressed, or spawning vehicles for only that player to see, etc. Then you have shared code, which is loaded on both server and client. And the reason you need that is for number one is going to be config files. That's the most common one, right? So, for example, if you've ever downloaded a script, there's usually a config file that you can go in and edit it. So basically, we want to be able to load the options the owner sets in both the server and client, so we can utilize those options later in our code, right? You also have utility functions. So think like, for example, a function of rounding numbers. Instead of having to copy and paste a function every time on both the server and client side, you can just have one shared file that does things. So for example, if you want to round numbers, you just write it once, load it on both the client and server. Now, if you ever need to round numbers, whether you're on the client or whether you're on the server side, it will work. Hope that kind of makes sense. Another thing is maybe going to be shared data, job names, item lists, constants. So for example, if you had a big list of job names in your server and you wanted to be able to load all the job names on the client and on the server, instead of copying and pasting and duplicating code, you're going to be able to just load it all in one thing, which brings us on to our next point, which is preventing duplicated code. And as we kind of looked at in the past video, in coding, that can, especially as you scale more and more, it can become really important to not duplicate code, because if you have multiple functions duplicated, every time you change one thing, you're going to have to go in and change it for every single one of them, and it's not very good to maintain long term. So hopefully that kind of breaks down what we're going to be going over in today's video, which is just going to be our FiveM natives, and then also alongside that our resource management, so server, client, and shared resources. With that being said, let's go ahead and head back over to our resource that we created in the last video, which in my example was called my script. And if you remember, all we did was load a client side script, right? Hopefully now you understand the difference between client side, server side, shared, right? So what we can actually do is we can load a server sided file by just coming here, creating a new file and calling this server.lua. Then if we come back into the FX manifest, we do server underscore script. Then we just do server.lua. This will load our server.lua on the server side, right? Then let's say we want to make a shared.lua. We go back in FX manifest, we do shared underscore script, shared.lua, right? So to break this down, you have your client script, client.lua, that's going to load on the client, server script, server.lua, that's going to load only on the server, shared script is going to load both on the client and server. So to kind of break this down even further, let's remove what we did in the last video, and let's just do print, this is the client. Then we can go into the server, and we'll auto print in here, print, this is the server. Then if we go into the shared, we can do print, this is shared, right? So now what we can actually do is we actually load into our FiveM server. One thing you may have to do when you actually load in, sorry, let me turn off this real quick. So one thing you have to do when you actually load in, if you actually change something in your FX manifest, you actually will need to do refresh first. If you don't refresh, it's not going to reload your FX manifest, meaning it's not going to start your new file. So do refresh, then do ensure my script or whatever you named your script. And then as you see here, we have this print here, this is shared, and this is the client, right? Because now if you come back in here, right, we have our client. This means that this is loading on the client, this is loading on the client too. But as you see, it didn't say print this is server because this is a server-sided script. So to view your server console, what you can actually do is just open your TXadmin up. If you don't know how to access your TXadmin, you can actually just go back on our channel. We have plenty of videos on how you guys can get to this point. And if you actually come here, and we can just clear this so it kind of makes more sense. And then let's just do restart, or no, sorry, do ensure my script. And then boom, right? This is shared, this is the server. So as you see now, we have our shared loading on both the server and client. And we also have, you know, our client and servers loading on the specific things. And the reason that this is important is server.lua, any server-sided files are never put on the client. And this is important for cheaters, because cheaters can actually dump your files, and what that basically means is they're going to be able to view anything that's loaded on the client, meaning someone could come into my server right now, quote unquote, dump this and be able to see this line right here of code, but they are not going to be able to see this line of code, right? So like, let's say I put, you know, local my secret equals 123, can't spell. Let's say my secret's 123. A modder would not be able to get this secret. But if I had this same thing in the shared or in the client, then a modder would be able to dump my files and then be able to find out what my secret is. So that's why it's really important that anything that is crucial, you know, think of this like a Discord token or a Discord webhook or anything like that, any kind of API key. You're going to want to make sure that's always server-sided so modders can't get a hold of that information, right? So that's why server-side is so important, and it's really, really important that you understand this part that I've went over up to this point very in depth, right? So kind of mess around with this a little bit more, get a really good understanding of the difference between a shared server and client, because it's super important to know long-term. And if you get these mixed up, you're going to, number one, create a lot of issues in general, because you can't make client and server side code run on one another. And number two is you're gonna have a lot of security issues long term. So you want to make sure you actually learn these pretty well. And yeah, so moving on, let's actually start working on FiveM natives now. So if we actually come back to the FiveM native reference that we just had open earlier, what we're going to actually do is, let's say we want to make our player invincible, right? Or sorry, invisible, meaning we can't view our player and our player is going to be invisible. Well, to do that, what we can actually do is we can come into here, and all we have to do is type in what we want. So it's kind of confusing sometimes, but and as you learn, you'll be able to you know, get more of in depth, right? So for example, if you type in invisible in here, there's not going to be anything on here that's talking about making the player invisible, right? There's set player invisibly locally, but that's not what we want. This is a different native. This is going to basically make it invisible for only me, but every other player can see me. I don't want this. I want to be invisible to every player. So me knowing this already, I actually know it's called something with visibility, right? So I can just type in visible. So it's going to actually be an entity because we're working with an entity. So your player, so you have different things as well. So entities are going to be things that you can spawn in. Think of a car, think of a prop, think of a player. Those are entities. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to find this native right here, which is called set entity visible. So if you can't find this, all you got to do is come in here, make sure you're on all, and type in set entity visible. Then you'll be able to find this. We're going to click on this, and we're actually going to just copy this here. Don't copy this. Don't copy all of this. We're only going to copy this part right here. Now, if we come into our code, and one thing you can also do is if you actually press server, as you see, this entity does not exist on the server side. So just to kind of prove what that means real quick, if we actually try and put this native on the server side, so let's just run this real quick, and we're just not going to pass any parameters. I know it's not going to work because there's no parameters, but if we actually just restart the script real quick, you're actually going to see an error right here, right? A nil value, set entity visible. That's because this native does not work on the server side. Does that make sense? That's why it's important to know those three differences first, because some natives don't work on everything. Some natives work on both client and server, but most natives are either specifically for the server or specifically for the client. So that's important to know, because now if we actually take this and we go to the client and we actually run this exact same thing, if we come in here and we restart, we're going to get a different error. Or sorry, we're not even going to get an error. So as you see, there's no error, but we actually didn't pass any parameters, meaning that that's why we're not invisible, right? So if you actually go back to the documentation, what you're actually going to see here is it's asking for things to be passed here. So we have entity. What entity do you want to toggle the visibility for? Do you want to toggle it on or off? And then we're going to UNK always 0 in script, so we can actually ignore that. So this is something you're going to see a lot in natives, is there's going to be a lot of parameters that you don't necessarily need. So the only two parameters we need in this case is going to be the entity we want to toggle for, and do we want to toggle it on or off, right? So to break that down even further, let's go back in game. So first off, we need to be able to specify the entity that we're trying to, make invisible. So in my case, I want it to be my player here. So to actually get your player, the native is called player ped ID right here. So we can actually do local player ped equals player ped ID. Remember, we're using natives. Then we want to make it invisible. So we're going to be able to set entity visible, my ped, false. Again, player ped ID is in the FiveM native reference. So if we actually go back in here, we go to client, you're actually going to be able to see this here. I'm not going to keep going through the native reference every time, just because it would take me forever to do so. And again, as you code more, you're going to know natives off the top of your head, the top of your head. But for now, just, go to FiveM natives if you need it, go to the documentations if you need it. But we're going to go ahead and put that up for now. Hopefully that kind of made sense and you know how to actually find natives now if need be. But for the rest of this, let's go ahead and break down how natives actually work and how you can use them. So again, for this native, we need to be able to specify the entity we're trying to, set the visibility for. In my case, it's going to be myself, which is going to be player pet ID. Then we want to make sure I'm invisible. So now if we come back in game and we restart this, as you see, I'm now invisible. If we go back into our code and we make this true, we can come back in our game, restart it again, and now I'm visible, right? So what you can actually do is we could come in here and just do local invisible. And then if we set this to true, we can actually just come down here and make this not invisible. So what this is going to basically do is flip the native. So in the last video, we kind of went over what, variables are. So think of it like this. When you have not invisible, then it's going to do the opposite of what the native is. I know it's kind of confusing, but this is important for if you're trying to make configurations, right? So if in other words, you could also do is visible, right? Because at that point, you can just do is visible right here straight, and you don't have to do not. All not's doing is making it the opposite of what it's set to. So if you want, for a configuration file for, future case, if you want to make it where invisible and you can do just equals true or false, then you'd have to put not down here to make it actually work properly. I hope that kind of makes sense. Either way would work. It's just that if you want to make it more easy readable or more understanding, like if someone opens this and they see local invisible equals true, they're going to know what that means. If it's like local visible, they may not know what that means. So that's why it's kind of important to kind of specify variables as specific as you can, that anyone can open this and they're instantly going to know what this variable here does. Hope that kind of makes sense. Sorry, I know that kind of just threw a curveball, but hopefully that kind of made sense a little bit. So now if we come back in here and we do this, as you see, I'm invisible because invisible set to true. If I now come in here and set invisible to false, I come in here and restart, boom, now I'm no longer invisible, right? So it's pretty powerful, and that's why FiveM natives are such a big thing to learn, because FiveM natives are literally the game itself. If you don't know FiveM natives, you can't control the game itself. So it's very important you actually learn FiveM natives. But let's take this a step further. I want to be able to do a command where I do slash visible or slash invisible, and then it makes my character invisible or not invisible. So to do this, there's actually a thing called register command. So what register command is going to do is it's actually going to let us register a command in game that we can use. So think like give item, right? That's a register command. Think add item. That's a register command. Think no clip. That's a register command. Anything that you see in a chat that's basically under there is a registered command that does something when it's called. So in this case, we're going to register a new command called invisible. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pass a function in like this. I know that this may be kind of confusing, just kind of copy my code. It'll make sense later, I promise. Then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to come here and we're going to grab this variable and we're going to do invisible equals not invisible. So what that's going to do is it's going to set the variable the opposite of itself, right? So it's going to set invisible. If let's say it's set to false in this case, then it's going to set it to true. If it's true, then it's going to set it to false. So it's kind of just setting the variable to be opposite. Then we can do set entity visible, the player pet. Again, this is going to be our player. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to move this inside of our command here, and we're going to remove this up here. So now it's going to get our player ped, right? It's going to set the player ped not invisible, and then invisible is set like this. So now if we actually come in here and we restart this, boom, and then we actually run the command. So we just do /invisible. You're going to see, boom, now I'm invisible. I run the command again, now I'm not invisible. I hope I'm not, going too advanced here. I know that, flipping variables like this I know when I first started, it was very confusing, but basically all we're doing is setting the variable opposite of itself. So that way, every time we run the command, it will automatically do this, right? So instead of having to do true, because if we just set this to true, then every time we ran this command, it would make us invisible. And that's not what we want. We want it to be the opposite, right? Because we want to be able to toggle it on and off. So that's why we do it like that. Also, for shared, what we can actually do is we can come in here and let me just show you how to make a config real quick. So if we do config, and if you remember in our last video, we can actually just make a big table, right? And then we can just do invisible equals false. So now what we can actually do is we can call config from we can call it from our server, we can call it from our client, we can call it from anywhere in our files because it's already loaded. So now what we can do is we can actually remove the logic here that handles invisibility, and we're just going to make it do config.invisible, right? So now what we can do is we can come in here, we restart our script, we do /invisible, and as you see, I'm still visible, right? But if I come in here and, if I come into our shared and I make invisible equal to true, then I come back in game, I restart it, and I do /invisible, and now I'm invisible. So I hope that kind of makes sense on how you can start making shared resources, how you can, start using FiveM Natives and things like that. In the next video, we're going to kind of dive into how to make the client and server start speaking to each other with kind of like events. So we can do something on the client, tell something to do on the server, and how we can actually get them to start kind of connecting. But learn the differences between shared server and client-sided files, and then learn FiveM natives. If you do that and then learn the basics of Lua like in the last video, you will be already so far ahead of 90% of people. And at that point, once you can understand these two first videos, you're going to be able to open up basically any Lua file and get at least a basic understanding of what's going on. So again, just study the first video, study this video. If you have any questions, join the Discord. You can ask us there. We are more than happy to help you. With that being said, hope you guys enjoy. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Once this video, make sure you guys like it, because if you guys keep liking the videos, I'll keep making more of these guides. Anyway, see y'all later.